There we go. Good. So thank you all for being here. I'm excited about sort of wrapping up our discussion of principles to action today. And what we're going to do today is talk about all the best practices, the 8 best practices. What are they, and then how do they fit in today's sort of COVID world? So the first step is I'd like for each of you to introduce yourself and then talk about the best practice. And so, Jere, you were our first expert in the room, and you were talking about sort of establishing mathematical goals to focus learning. Can you sort of describe what that looks like and who you are? And Jere, you're muted, so I'm going to unmute you. Okay, you're good.
Okay. Thank you, Chad. I'm Jere Confrey. Nice to see all of you. Hope you're doing well. I am a mathematics education researcher at North Carolina State University, and my practice in particular is talking about the importance of focusing your mathematics and using tasks to introduce mathematics in such a way as to really draw on the resources that kids bring to class and the different kinds of things we know about their reasoning. A fundamental idea within that is the notion of learning trajectories. And learning trajectories are descriptions of how kids move from naive reasoning to more sophisticated reasoning. And it's the things we know from watching kids solve interesting tasks that come up. We like to think of it as a climbing wall, and we know kids enter at different points. And we know that there are handholds and footholds that are predictable on that wall. And there are obstacles that are predictable on the wall. And the idea is to use what we know about the patterns in kids' reasoning to really draw out their strengths and to bring them into more and more sophisticated reasoning over time. So that's the practice that I had, and I'm hoping that will be helpful, and looking forward to conversations with my colleagues here about the importance of this set of practices.
Thanks, Jere. Yes, you would not believe the number of times the idea of a learning trajectory or knowing where you're going and where you came from came up in every other of our practice. These are really interwoven, right? They're not done in isolation, as you heard in her definition. Okay, implementing tasks that promotes reasoning and problem solving. And Steve Leinwand, you're going to talk about that a little bit.
So I'm Steve Leinwand. I'm a troublemaker, a mathematics change agent. I still work some at the American Institutes of Research on a whole range of programs and projects involving mathematics. I would like to just pause for 1 second and remind you that if you look at the 8 mathematical teaching practices, that the heart of the first 2, that is the planning and the tasks, the goals I mean, and the tasks, that's the planning. That is essential. You cannot teach a good lesson if you are not clear on what you're going to do and what you're going to use to accomplish those goals. There are so many classes that I've seen and that we've all been in where people are really clear about their goals, finally. They pick some really good tasks because they steal them from somewhere, and then they bomb because the next 3 that we'll talk about are the way in which they get used and implemented effectively. And that is the representations, the questions, and the discourse that captures the classroom culture. And then the last 3 that we'll talk about today are really the enhancements and the monitoring. That is that given all of that, your mindset has to be that fluency emerges from conceptual understanding, that kids are expected to struggle, and that if you don't monitor what students are doing, well, then it isn't going to work. And so that's really the way in which those 8 fit together. Tasks. So Jere says appropriately that you determine your learning outcome, you determine your learning goal. I hope that if you think about that, you think about it in some modicum of detail so that it is not just students will do lesson 2.4, it is not just students will divide fractions, but that goal actually describes what students should be able to do. We're going to come back to that in evidence because they are the bookends. When you are clear on your goal, then you know what kind of a formative assessment to ask in terms of the evidence that you gather. Meanwhile, back at tasks, once I have my goal, the question is, what are students going to be doing? And we say very clearly that students should be engaged in rich tasks that promote reasoning and problem solving, and that effective teaching engages students in solving. Tasks could be a problem. It could be a word problem done in different ways. It can involve What do you notice? What do you wonder about it? It could be watching a video and then having a discussion of what's in the video. It could be a group activity on a problem. It could be an analysis of how two student solutions are the same or different. And so all of those speak to the range of tasks, all of which go beyond simply getting a right answer and get at, how do you know, what could it be, how is it the same, how is it different?
Mm-hmm. I love that. Tasks that engage students, that help the teacher gain a deep understanding of what's happening and help the students build that knowledge. That's wonderful. Okay, so using and then connecting mathematical representations. Steve, I think you were there for that one too. You led us in that conversation as well. So you get to go over on your allotted time.
So all I want anyone to do is to envision in their brain 3 quarters. And I'll sometimes write on the board THREEQUARTES and say, bingo, what do you see? Great, erase it. Come up with a different picture of 3. Establish some fluency with the multiple representations. Good, toggle to the second one. Erase them both. And then come up with the 3rd representation of 3 quarters. Good. Now take out your whiteboards and transfer your mental images into an actual drawing, a physical image. And let's put our whiteboards up in the front of the room. And what we find is that the essence of effective differentiation, the recognition that there are 24 different brains in every class in which mathematics is being taught, means that there are 5 or 6 different ways that kids are processing the mathematics, ergo alternative approaches. And there are 3 or 4 or 5 different ways that students are seeing the mathematics, ergo multiple representations. 25 cents. Another student has a square and it is cut into 4 smaller squares and 3 of them are colored. Another one does the circle and the pizza pie. Another one sits there and talks about 3 quarters on a number line. And another one sees that it is 3 out of 4 balloons. And so what happens is we recognize that it is the ability to move beyond the numbers in many cases when you're learning this stuff. And even advanced mathematics, it is how do you picture it? And so this idea of multiple representations really gets at the balance between a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. It gets at the fact that they work interdependently. And when you're able to picture it and describe your picture and compare the picture, when a teacher sits there and says, how are these 2 representations the same? How are they different? In algebra, where we have a table, a graph, words, and an equation. The question is, so where is the 4 that's in this equation in that graph? Where is it in this table? That is how we build important mathematical understanding.
Yep, I love that. An important skill too in the real world when you're facing those type of problems. Kim, you're going to talk a little bit about facilitating meaningful. No, Linda's talking about facilitating meaningful mathematical questions, and Kim, you're going to talk about posing purposeful questions. Discourse.
My name is Linda Kojak.
Discourse.
I have spent most of my career teaching elementary and middle school mathematics and working in professional development with teachers. I'm so sorry. Guess who that is? I'm also the past president of NCTM. I am so sorry. Somebody just showed up at my front door.
That's fine.
So can I ask you to go to somebody else? Let me take.
We'll do that. Yes, and I'll let you mute yourself. And yes, fine.
I'm so sorry.
That's fine. Kim, you talk about posing purposeful questions.
Sure.
That is the 3rd. And let me just say that's the 3rd in the block of things that Steve was talking about. These fit together. Go ahead, Kim.
Okay. So posing purposeful questions really has to do with how you execute the lesson. So Steve was talking about preparing and planning and being ready. Well, when you are in the lesson, posing purposeful questions becomes a key part of your strategy. So the reason we do this is because we're looking to know what students understand and where their thinking is, but it also helps us adapt on the fly to try to be ready and adaptable to what students are actually coming up with, not what we intend for them to come up with, but what they are actually doing. And our job in the end is to help students make the important connections, like we talked about with the multiple representations. That's our goal in posing questions. So one of the things about posing questions that's important is that sometimes we gather information. We're looking to figure out what they know and if they can repeat some information. One of the problems is sometimes we hear what we think we need to hear and not what they're actually saying. So when we pose purposeful questions, we need to push a little further, ask more questions, get deeper, and step back and let them tell us what they think, not what we want them to think. So the other thing we might do is help to give them supports when we're asking these questions. Give them strategies for making answers visible. So when we ask questions, we might say, well, how does that equation match up with that graph? So tell me what's going on there. Where do you see the 3 in the graph? Where do you see the 3 in the equation? Where do you see it in the blocks that you're working with right here? And we don't often demand this. We may ask for it, but we often don't demand it and expect it. And that's actually a missing piece. So when we ask students to do this, we should be continuing to find value in that. I guess sometimes when you ask these questions and you push a little harder, you get a little deeper into what students really understand, and it might surprise you. And when we have the right answers, sometimes they may not be for the reasons that we really want them to be. So the more pushing and probing we can do by posing great questions will get us there. And when students answer these questions, we're really getting at the essence of proof. The stronger their answers are and the more reflective and more concentrated on their justifications, we know that they're working towards the end goal, which is being able to justify and prove their own answers.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think when we were talking about posing purposeful questions, we were talking about making student thinking visible. And it's so easy in the classroom to want to make my thinking visible as the teacher, because I've done a lot of thinking about this, but I really want to ask questions to make their thinking visible. Linda, is it safe there? I'm going to unmute you.
Unmuting, yeah. Yeah, it's safe now. Sorry.
That's fine.
It's been one of those days. So actually, it's fine that Kim went first on purposeful questions, because I think purposeful questions really are part of the key to discourse. So my topic is classroom discourse. And I want to start by defining what I think discourse is about, because I think there are some misconceptions about discourse just being about talking. But to me, discourse is about the ways that students help to express their understanding of a mathematical idea, so that I, as a teacher, have a better understanding of where the kids are. And discourse can take, it's so well connected to the representations that kids use, as well as it is encouraged by the types of questions we ask as teachers. So discourse is not only about talking, it certainly can be, and I think for many kids that's the easiest way to show their understanding, but I want to make sure that we're not just isolating it, particularly in this day of COVID, to just talking and sharing ideas. Let me see, what else do I have here? So the focus is really on helping the teacher to understand where the kids are in developing their understanding of a mathematical concept. And I think so often, traditionally, it has been about the teacher sharing his or her understanding of a topic, rather than really probing to find out what sense kids are making out of division of fractions, or subtracting 2 whole numbers, or any other concept across the board. So I think it often starts with kids just having the opportunity to talk to each other. And there's a rubric in Principles to Actions that I really like, but I've simplified it a little bit, worked with a lot of teachers on this rubric. And it's a beautiful rubric, but I simplified it because I think you have to think about this in a couple of different levels. And the lowest level of discourse in a classroom was where the teacher is doing most of the talking, showing and telling, and just expecting kids to regurgitate what he or she just did. So there's not a whole lot of understanding happening there. I think the next level is where we ask really good questions and listen to individual students, talk about their understanding, but the teacher still is the smart person in the room. It's still around the kids may be developing some ideas and really understanding what the teacher's talking about, but it's not about students developing their own understanding. And ideally, I think where we really want to aspire to be is where kids have the opportunity to talk to one another, share their thinking with each other, ask each other questions, write things down, draw pictures, maybe show it with concrete objects, and then be ready to explain what they've done to the others in the class. And so the role of the teacher shifts to being more of a facilitator and a prober, asking probing questions. I don't know if prober is the right word. Asking probing questions to really get kids to be comfortable in talking about their thinking. So it's not just about, I put down the 1 and carried the 2 or whatever. It's really about kids talking about the sense they're making out of the mathematics that they're doing. And I could go on for another 10 minutes, but I think.
Thank you for monitoring. And you can see how they all fit together again. I mean, you can't ask those questions unless you have a meaningful task, and you can't write a meaningful task unless you've done some real planning. Great, thank you so much. Okay, so now we're going to talk about building procedural fluency from conceptual understanding. And James is going to talk a little bit about that.
Hi everyone, my name's James Burnett. You can tell by the accent. I'm down under at the moment, so I'm the founder and CEO. No, I'll just go that roll up. I'm founder and executive chair of Origo Education. We've been around 25 years, and although I do most of my work in North America, in the current situation, I'm here in Australia, which is not a bad place to be trapped at the moment. Yes, Chad asked me on the panel because I guess our company has been focusing on this practice way before it was really a practice, written up in books, that is, and that is developing the concepts, or teaching math conceptually. So there's 2 big ideas going on there: developing procedural fluency from conceptual understanding. So fluency being efficient and flexible and approaches and obviously to generate accurate answers. And then the conceptual side. So what's a concept? A concept is an idea or a mental image. So you build the concepts first, and from that you develop the understanding. And the idea to do that, the reason to do this is then you can apply, if you truly understand the strategy or the procedure, you can apply it across many situations and extend it if you like. And you're more likely to retain it. The way you and I learned, and probably everyone on this panel, is we learn mathematics very procedurally in our day through memorization. And it worked for some if you had a good memory, and if you didn't, you tend to forget the procedure, and then you had no way of regenerating it because you didn't understand it in the first place. You weren't taught the concept. So I just thought I'd take about 1 minute to show you an example. When you get to around 2nd or 3rd grade, you want to start teaching your basic multiplication facts. And generally we go straight to memorization. That's the way I learned it. So that's what we do. Well, the idea is to back up and actually understand the concept of multiplication and use different representations to teach multiplication. Multiplication is this, this, and this, and eventually get to arrays. So multiplication is equal rows or equal columns, whichever way you see it. And if you're going to teach the 5s facts, for example, multiplication by 5. They have to understand multiplication as an array. That's not multiplication by 5, as you can see. We might already know this. What do you see? I ask the students, what do you see? How do you know how many there are? And elicit some responses. Oh, there's 10 4s. Very good. So there's 10 4s. I already know 10 4s are 40, and hopefully they'll give you various ways of knowing that, either by place value or enumeration, I should say. They might use repeated addition, but they know 10 4s are 40. What's 5 4s? Oh, okay. So I'm leveraging something I already know. So, and again, we as adults here in this group, we didn't learn this way, but I should know 10 4s. So 5 4s is simply half of that. And then I can, through different experiences, we can extend that and apply it to different situations. What's 5 16s? I don't know. I do know 10 16s. 10 16s are 160. So 5 16s must be half of that. And with the right prerequisite skills and activities, and they can double and halve numbers like that and extend it to other situations. So that's the idea of this particular practice.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And again, starting with understanding, not going straight to procedural fluency, because you're going to make mistakes, and then you learn something that probably you have to unlearn.
So I just interrupt for one? Yeah. What I loved about what Jim just did is he tied everything together. I mean, he basically had a very clear goal of establishing an understanding of multiplication, not simply getting multiplication facts. His tasks involve visual representations. And what do they mean? And different ways of looking at those representations. That was the task. You heard the questions he was asking, and for every one of those questions, you could hear the kind of discourse that kids could engage in. That's why I think these 8 flow together so powerfully.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks for adding that, Steve. John, hopefully you get those tasks and have to do some struggle, and John's going to talk about what that looks like.
Yeah, that's right. You teed me up very well there, Steve. So hi, I'm John SanGiovanni, coordinator of mathematics in Howard County, Maryland. About halfway between Baltimore and Washington, and one of my roles is leading the mathematics program, including developing the curriculum, providing professional learning for our teachers and our administrators, designing curriculum resources, and what have you. So I get to talk with you about struggle. It's my favorite topic because to me, struggle is the essence of learning and making sense of the world, as opposed to acquiring someone else's ideas of it or memorizing how they engage or interact with it. Struggle isn't well understood. It's associated with, well, it isn't associated with successful teaching in the United States or many other places for that matter. In fact, learning itself is a direct outcome of struggle, but it's not something that as teachers we often embrace. We say we value it, but I'm in classrooms most every day, when we're in classrooms. And I noticed that as teachers we avoid it or we undermine it without even realizing. And in some cases we haven't selected a task or put forth the effort on the front end so that the struggle itself can thrive. Now, productive struggle can be thought of maybe as purposefully reacting to an unclear challenge so that progress is made and my own learning is advanced. So that's kind of what I might think about struggle as. From the literature, we know that struggle is necessary for learning mathematics deeply. It moves instruction beyond a focus on just recall and rote procedures, similar to what James just spoke about, right? Learning to struggle and to persevere, it leads to long-term benefits, but not just in mathematics, but in life in general. And we've heard a lot about resilience and grit, and productive struggle actually develops that, right? As well as perseverance. And those things then shape the math identities for each and every student. Their appetite or willingness to embrace challenge and problem solving, or, well, their avoidance of it. Activating productive struggle to me redefines the student and teacher success in general by extending math beyond just finding answers. But there's one, challenge in all of this. Our experiences as teachers and leaders and what have you, they compromise how we facilitate struggle or how we view it in some ways. In fact, our teacher preparation didn't necessarily prepare us for struggle. Instead, it prepared us to avoid it, right? And help us think about all the actions we would take so that students would get to a right answer or be successful at the conclusion of 60 minutes. And again, in the United States and in other places, struggle conflicts with notions of what it means to be successful. For me, and for many of my colleagues, and maybe you as well, struggle is often thought like it's in the moment and it's unpredictable, but we know that today it's more than that. In fact, I can take action as a teacher, and beginning with valuing struggle and fostering student identity so that they embrace it. So they work in a community that I've built or helped them build to foster struggle. But I want to get to 3 things that we really have to do. Plan for struggle, and that means selecting that task that others have alluded to, anticipating what students might do so that I'm prepared to act and react intentionally, thinking about how I'm going to support it without hijacking it. And the last thing that we can do is help students reflect on how they struggled and how they persevered. And though they may not have successfully overcome it, they engaged in it, right? And so to me, we have a lot of work still to do with productive struggle, not just in mathematics, but in teaching and learning in general.
Thanks, John. Do you know, when I was a new teacher, I just got my PhD and was teaching early in the year, and I got the biggest compliment, partly from a student. And she raised her hand and said, "I just don't think you're teaching me very well, because if you were, this would be a lot easier." And I was thinking, so thank goodness, that's good. And secondly, she felt confident enough as a 7th grader to tell her big teacher that I don't think you're teaching me very well. So I'm glad she felt safe in my
Great
class.
story.
I hadn't
fantastic.
planned for that, so yeah.
And Chad, can I add on to
Yes.
John's
Yeah.
comment just a bit, because it's kind of like coming around in a circle.
Yes,
And
please
that
do.
is the thing about the learning trajectories or the progressions are that in some sense they make a story that tells you why you needed an idea
Mhm.
and then allows you to have the opportunity to invent that idea. So those stories, those trajectories are sort of only as good as they're gritty.
Mhm.
Because as with any story, it's a lot more interesting when you're part of it and you're trying to guess where it's going to go and how it might move along. So I really like that description that you just gave us about planning, anticipating, supporting, and reflecting, because I do think that that's exactly this notion that it's a process of growth. And if you just give them the procedures, as James said, then all they're going to be able to do is do the procedure. Well, machines can do that fine. It's human thinking that is unique about its ability to understand the genesis and the development of these ideas and to invent ideas and struggle with them to make it work. So again, I think it all goes together, as you said, Chad. These are all interacting with each other.
Yes.
And we don't want students to be struggling to memorize something or recall something, right?
Right.
The struggle is about learning to reason and think. And we've, in one way or another, factored that out of how we approach many things, unfortunately. But I think we're making a comeback.
Right. Well, productive is a word we don't want to forget in this.
That's right.
Yeah, it has to be productive. Kim, so wrap us up, because we need to understand what the students are thinking and learning, and tell us about that.
Absolutely. So the last practice is elicit and use evidence of student thinking. So this ties into what John was saying and what Jere was saying, because when we ask students to give us information, they're giving us a window into their struggle. They're giving us a window into where they fall on a learning trajectory so that we can focus on where they are and help them move forward the very next step that's going to help them be successful. So their struggle isn't unproductive. It ends up being a productive type of struggle. But it would be wrong to consider this particular practice as just assessment. Assessment can be formative, and this is a formative practice, but it also has a summative nature to it. And this is not really about summative assessment. It's about gathering information in the moment so that you can use it while you're teaching. It not only informs what you know about students and their trajectories, but it also informs what you know about your class in general. The progression of a task, for example, it may not be going the way you think it should go. And as you're gathering this information, you can get that sort of data so that you can make a change. You can adapt while you're in process. One of the things we started talking about, but we really didn't wrap up on, was thinking about how this works in the online environment. When we are face-to-face, we often ask these questions. Maybe they're rhetorical. They're up on your screen or you write them on the board. In the face-to-face class, that works pretty well. Maybe you don't hear from every student, but in the online class, you have the potential to get information from every student in an instant. Whatever learning management system you're working, you can ask a question and give students a very small place to respond and gather their information personally. And you can flip through that really quickly and see where everybody is. But that brings us back to the multiple representations. We really need to ask students to show us many different ways so that the evidence we gather is multimodal. It tells us more ways, not just verbal, not just an equation, not just symbols, not just a single thing. When we're online, we can use cameras to upload an image. We can use a short clip to upload a student doing something with a manipulative on a table. We can upload a picture. We can download an image from the internet. There's a lot of ways that we can get information from students to help us understand where their thinking is. So this particular practice asks us to reconsider what is evidence of student learning. Is it evidence of what you think it should be as the teacher, or is it evidence of where they really are? And I think that's a theme that's come up a couple times in our discussion. So if you take that a little adjustment, that you're not assessing their progress towards your goal, but their progress towards their goal and the way that they're going to make a path to understand a particular math topic.
That's great. So focusing on the student. And you can see here that I agree with what you're saying as opposed to disagreeing or maybe not sure. I got this little tool online as a way of getting evidence of my thinking. So we're going to, I think, modify that and put even letters in each of those colors. So that'd be a great little tool if you are using something online. Thank you all. That's really thorough, and I think it's a valuable foundation. What I also want to start us with a foundation is to say, you know, we're working with, in the US and internationally, with teachers maybe who are used to lecturing, who are maybe told that's the only way you're supposed to teach, that they're the ones who have the knowledge and they're giving the knowledge. And now we're talking about a pretty radical way of teaching differently in a pretty radical time. And does anyone have anything that you could help? Let's say I'm a new teacher going, holy cow, are you kidding me? I'm supposed to do that and teach asynchronous lessons to kids I can't really see? Help me out. Is there anything anyone could want to say? Yes, John, thanks.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, let's be frank. Struggle is something that's going to happen in this world coming forward regardless, right? However, I think there are some things that ring true for the real world, so to speak, in the virtual world in terms of instruction. And that, again, comes back to thinking about how students are going to engage in that mathematical, that high quality task. What are some things that they're going to do? How am I going to be prepared to support them? Like, what things am I going to do to poke them, to move them forward, without, again, just say, okay, put down your pencil or what have you, and watch me do it, right? And then I think the other thing that we want to do too is think about what tools or assets might be part of the virtual world that can support the learning without, again, just doing it over. So, you know, what tools should they have access to and be comfortable with? In a classroom, you might want to make sure they know how to use a multiplication chart in third grade. So, you know, in third grade virtual, do they have access to that chart? How will they use it to support them in the task if they get stuck? So I think those are some of the considerations. We're trying to bridge two worlds, and it may be the medium that's different, but the ideas I think are the same.
Mm-hmm. I like that a lot. Yes, Steve.
I think the only.
Go ahead, Steve.
I think the only perspective that we need to assume is that this is just an amazing opportunity. I mean, it's so easy to just do, oh, woe is us, oh, woe is we. I just want to go back to the normal. I think we have a wonderful opportunity to realize that the normal, the old normal, was very unfair and very unjust. I think that we are able to sit here now and say, just look at healthcare. I mean, how can you not recognize that we are all at risk because everyone doesn't have healthcare? How can we not recognize that education has sorted kids out viciously and ruthlessly, more on the basis of skin color than on economic status than on anything else? And so I see this as an opportunity. I look a little historically, and I stop and pause and think about how we became a better society after the Great Depression. In some ways, we instituted things that made a difference. I've been reading Chocolate City, the history of Washington, D.C., and it took the riots of '68 to move Congress off of its butt to give this city and the African-American citizens some power. And so I look now and see that this hybrid arrangement, this need to use technology and not always have face-to-face, is a chance for us to first and foremost say, we've got to deal with social emotional learning. We know that there's loneliness. We know that there's a lack of social interaction. We know that there are kids who are really hurting, and schools have always been a refuge. And so before we worry about all the math in the world, we've got to take a deep breath and realize kids are not going to learn any math if they are not feeling better about themselves. And so I think that all teachers win, all kids win, if we stop and say, I know I'm supposed to be teaching math. I know this is my hour from math, but wait, what's going on? How are things? What's bothering you? Or just that opportunity to share where it's somewhat safe and kids can go into their breakout rooms and other kinds of things. Then I think what we've learned is that no teacher should ever go for more than 5 minutes in a setup or in a description. That's all it should take. The kids need to have access to it either online or it comes via paper or some other ways. But I mean, it's forcing us to stop and say, what good is mindless worksheet practice when there's no feedback or the feedback is only right answers? We sort of got away with it because, well, we just sort of assumed it was busy work and it was what we were supposed to do. You can't do that now. So I see that as a great giant step forward. And if we attach some socio-emotional learning and then we do 5 minutes and then unleash the kids, and then I don't care if the kids don't have Desmos, they can hold up a piece of paper in a Google Meet or in a Zoom meeting and be able to show what it looks like, and they have discussion about their work. That to me is the opportunity, and we're all in this together. As John just said, we're all struggling and nobody has all the answers. I think the coolest thing that's happened when I look at my Twitter feed is teachers are adamant that people who are not doing it have no right to tell them what the hell to do. An ex-music teacher assistant superintendent does not know how to teach reading to kids under these circumstances. I'll tell you who does know. The great teachers are doing great things because they have no lives. I've been blessed. I spent from March 15th until June 1st supervising the distance learning of my 13-year-old 7th grade granddaughter. I mean, that just gave me a chance to see math and science at its worst and English language arts and social studies at its best. I screamed, why is it that every single teacher in this school didn't get to see what this English language arts teacher did? Because it was masterful, it was brilliant, it was engaging. Those kids were learning so much, and I think that all of that comes together as things we ought to think about. Take a deep breath. It's not going to work most of the time. We need to give ourselves some forbearance. We have to be patient with ourselves and with everybody else, but see the opportunities.
Yes, I love that, Steve. This is an opportunity to make a difference. And for everyone to, if you're listening to this, be patient too. You're not going to make the change immediately. It may take a year. This is about making a slow change. Kim, you're going to say something, then Jere, then John, James, and then John. Because I appreciate it. I want to hear from every one of you, and this is super helpful. Go ahead, Kim.
So I had the opportunity to interview a couple teachers in May, just for a random reason. And one of the questions that I asked them is, what has been good about this pandemic? Because there's plenty of bad about going to emergency learning, and we got that out of the way. So what's good? And they thought for a moment, and finally one teacher said, you know, we've really had to change what we do because all of our stuff was in the building and we couldn't get it. And so now we didn't do anything the same as we normally do. And she said, it's kind of freeing. It was just a letting go. So my thought was, you can't repeat what you used to do. They're starting over again. And so now we're really, like Steve says, we're rethinking the old ways that we do this. And so when we come back, if there ever is something akin to normal, what will we be doing differently because we've had this experience?
Mm-hmm. This is a really opportunity for us. Jere.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And what Steve said too, which is, we cannot emphasize enough how important it is to reassure kids. I wrote a kids book back in May called Love Without Hugs to try and help kids understand the whole issue of how it is that one can be a carrier and not be sick, and how that's a really hard concept for kids to think they could get somebody sick without being sick. And sort of drew the analogy to a dog carrying burrs and the fact that they can do it without them knowing it. But the important thing was, there's a little girl in the group. I did a couple of readings out loud online, and you know, she talked for a little while and eventually just talked about crying every night. And she wasn't telling her parents that this was happening for her. So I do want to reinforce what Steve said. We've got to reassure these kids and make sure that that their well-being is there. Now, that said, I also think it's really important, some of the things that Kim said about different uses of formative practices. and finding out where they're at. One of the things when you teach, you walk around the room and you're picking up tons of information about kids. You're seeing their eyes, you're seeing what they're paying attention to, and you're coming in without that information, which is really a hard way to try and teach. So I think I want to really encourage people, and also these kids, some of them have been out for months and others have been continuing to learn. So I think it's super important, and Steve made the point of just the piece of paper, and you made the point of your colors in the background. Really informal ways to ask very simple questions, to just check and make sure you know where they're starting, what they understand, what they don't understand, and that conversation is fundamental to your interactions with them. You can't get started without it, and kids want validation for their reasoning, for their effort, for the participation. And so I just want to emphasize those ideas again, that let some of that take precedence. We need to take care of our kids right now and to really reassure them about the circumstance they're working in. And once they buy in and they feel like they're validated, they're important in the context, then they'll stick with us as we take them through some of the productive struggle that we were talking about in the conceptual development.
Thanks, Jere. I love the idea of safety as needing to be there. That's really critical. Powell,
I have a question.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
okay, can we go through, let me hear from James and John first, and then I want to hear your question. Okay, thanks. Go ahead, James.
Oh, I just wanted to thank Steve for his passionate explanation or contribution there, because I could not agree more. I mean, in the business world, these crises such as the pandemic come around in a different format. It might be a government initiative, something like that. Come along around once every 10 years or something. But you have to pivot and take the opportunity to do something different. And there's no better time than taking this opportunity to try something different. If we keep doing, as they say, what we've always done, we're going to get the same result. You now have permission from every single person to try something different. And that's what we're doing. That's what this today is about, really, is to try these practices. And you will get it wrong, but if you don't try, you will never know. So you have to try something different.
Yeah, I love
I just
that.
wanted to add that.
That's great. Yep, that's excellent. Both the teacher and the student in the classroom, because I know that when I have some meetings with certain people, I have to talk to them about what their role is as a participant. I need to see your face. I need you to nod and do different kinds of nonverbal actions because I can't see the body as much. John, what were you going to say?
I guess I want to double down again on what Steve said, and I think we've all endorsed that as well. Social emotional learning in this time cannot be understated. Where we lost our way with knowing who kids are and building strong communities. I don't know how that happened or when it happened or what have you, but it's not just for the virtual world though. And that's the one thing I just want to strengthen, is that these are practices that we're doing now because of all these different reasons. But we have to maintain them when we come back to the real world a year from now, 6 months from now, or whenever that may be, right? Knowing who our students are, not just the data points they represent, is critical to meeting their needs. And sometimes we miss that. So thanks, Steve, for launching that conversation.
Yes. Know who kids are. I think that's great. Not only who they are, but in mathematics too. That's what this whole focus is, right? We wanted to know what they know and who they are with regard to this concept. Paul, what were you going to ask? Because what I'd like to do is move a little bit. I mean, look, we only have about 25 minutes and we have like a 3-hour conversation. How do you solve this? I don't know the answer. And maybe you guys do. Jere does right now, but she's not going to tell us. She's going to tell us in a book. But what I'd love to do is, you guys are on the ground. Callie asked me a really great question, and Paul has asked, I know you have something. So let's work through some of those questions now that we set this foundation. Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you. Hi everyone. I'm Paola Castillo. I'm Ecuadorian, so just let you know when I'm asking is from Ecuador too. I am the director of partnerships here in Ecuador, and I'm glad Steve, James, and John, and everyone mentioned this idea of having the opportunity to do things differently. And as Kim said, we can't go back to do the same things we did, but just now virtually. So that's not the idea. And my example and my question is around that. Because in Ecuador, the Ministry of Education here has decided that all homeworks and reading tasks that teachers send to their students should be stored in a folder that's called a portfolio. which should be delivered to teachers at the end of the semester or when we go back to face-to-face classes. So teachers can later grade that portfolio or that folder full of full of homeworks, and that grade worth a large percentage of the whole entire school grade. So I like to think on the portfolio idea as a reflective and deliberative selection and organization tool. I like that idea, but I don't think that's the idea that our teachers are having now. So I would like you to think, what kind of suggestions or specific tips could you give to our teachers to turn their folders into a real portfolio where it can be an actual tool that can elicit and use evidence of their mathematical student thinking?
Okay, let's let Kim start. Okay.
Change what passes for homework. Paulo? I mean, when homework is just practice and worksheets, and you just put those, 40 different examples in a folder, I mean, so what? I mean, the kids that know it get it right. The kids that don't know it have no opportunity to learn it. And there's no evidence of learning. So if we're going to have a packet and we want it to reflect the idea of monitoring student learning, then we've got to have different kinds of tasks, different kinds of assignments. And that's what I collect. And I have first draft and second draft and third draft of certain things, and not just, a page of computation.
That's great. Kim, go ahead, and then Jere.
Yeah, over the summer, I worked with a handful of colleagues to create a geometry course, and we used it using the premise of trauma inspired. And so it is trauma sensitive. That's what we intended to do. We set out to make a class that was predictable, which is part of one of the responses to a traumatic situation, is be predictable, be sensitive, and be aware. But you all have touched on that pretty well. But one of the things we did was we created interactive notebooks. And it was all done it was Google Slides, so whatever equivalent you might have available to you. But what we did was we gave students structures and organizations so they knew where they were. But then we had group slides where they worked together, and then they went and spent individual time to create an independent answer using the group information. And so it had a collaborative component and had an individual component, and that was all done mostly during class time, other than a few lines of reflection at the bottom of what you learned, what you changed as you did your individual work. So that's the kind of thing that could become what you're speaking of, this type of portfolio. It's part collaborative, part individual, and it was entirely done online. We had online manipulatives online. We were using GeoGebra for the course, but anything that you're using that's digital.
Good. Jere, what were you going to add?
I was only going to add, and in the spirit of doing it differently, we did a project this year in an ITEST grant, and we created something called Design and Pitch Challenges. You look it up and look under NCSU, you'll see these. And I think the issue sort of is there's these different ways of doing instruction, one of which is project-based instruction, one of which is design-based instruction. And what we were adding into that is entrepreneurial based instruction. These particular things are 9 middle grade challenges that challenge kids to invent something to solve a problem and require them to think about the underlying business model that's involved in it. It's very entrepreneurial. So for instance, one of them, and we have these great challenge champions who come out of Tesla or other places who actually created interesting solutions, including a young woman in middle school who invented something that would detect lead in water because of what had happened in Flint around the water crises. But one of the problems, for instance, is called Keep It Real, and it's about phubbing. It's about people, phubbing is phone snubbing. It's people who are not paying attention to you because they're paying attention to their phone. And we ran it with a bunch of middle school kids, and they basically were trying to create a way in which they could help kids monitor their own phubbing behavior and decrease the phubbing behavior. That's just an example, but you know, there are really interesting examples out there of and again, project-based instruction, design-based instruction, in our case, entrepreneurial-based instruction. And those provide the kind of thing you're looking for in terms of much more interesting evidence about it, as well as the fact that when the kids do this, in the end, in these competitions, you have 5 minutes to pitch your idea. And in 5 minutes, you got to explain to a group of judges what your idea was in a very concise and exacting kind of way in order to try and get somebody to support your business. So I think there's other ways to create the portfolios around compelling activities that we need to be bringing in during this time, so that the evidence in our portfolios is much richer than just a set of answers to questions.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, because I really hear that as a really project-like task. And Linda has mentioned this a few times. Callie was just telling me how, Linda, you sparked our thinking about this idea of, let's talk about sending a project home with the students, and then what is involved with that. Do we give an answer? Do we give a process guide and a sort of structure of what you might be thinking about? And I think that's a much more powerful tool than just 50 problems in a handout. And in fact, I used to tell my students when they did portfolios for me, I want it to be something that you're proud of. I want you to see the next year's teacher to go, isn't it cool that I did this? They're not, it's, you know, worksheet of questions is not cool. Linda, what were you going to say?
I mean, I'm mute. I think I'm
Yeah,
on mute.
yeah.
Okay. So I'm thinking about the context of all my trips to Guatemala and Ecuador, and trying to think about this as culturally based. I also think about young children and the importance of their, as James said, developing conceptual understanding. So I think particularly as kids' mathematics learning is somewhat new. I love the idea of project-based. I just love it. Because some of the best things I did when I was teaching were project-based things. Some of the most fantastic work I got from kids was project-based. But there seemed to be, at least for elementary and early elementary, a fundamental level of knowledge they had to have to be able to really make that a worthwhile task. So I struggle a little bit with how do we combine that, some of the conceptual leading to procedural understandings we want to develop that kids can use when they're doing a project-based task. And then the other thing I was also thinking about is I think this is the perfect opportunity to give kids some rich tasks. They don't necessarily have to be performance or project-based, but some rich tasks that really enable them to uncover some of the mathematics that we might more formally teach in a school situation. But that's, at the same time, that's very hard for individual teachers, particularly if they're not confident in their own mathematics understanding to develop. So I think that's a challenge to the team, the Teach-A-T team, and teachers, and maybe some of us, to try to find some of those types of tasks that teachers can give kids that are very purposeful in nature, and not just because they're fun to do. Mm-hmm. But that's a challenge. That's a real struggle, and that lays a lot on a classroom teacher.
It does, indeed.
Let alone grading it all, Paul. Waiting to grade it all.
Yes.
I have a question, actually.
Yes,
sorry, Chad.
Good. I was going to ask for questions. So go ahead, Alex.
Okay. Thanks. So my question, so I'm Alex. I'm the director of programs here in Guatemala. And a lot of things that I hear you guys mentioning has to do with like technology and having access to that as a resource for teachers, which some teachers here do have access to, but a lot of the teachers that we work with don't. And so I'm wondering, what are your guys' thoughts or ideas around what kind of support we can offer to teachers who only see their students like maybe once a week or don't even see them? They just have sort of a homework packet that they send home. Like how does this change when you take technology out of the equation in terms of how we're able to support teachers in supporting their students when they don't see them even virtually?
Yeah. If I may, I just sent Chad a couple of examples of worksheets, because I cringe when I hear the word portfolio, because I think a lot of teachers associate portfolios with worksheets, and I'm not a fan of worksheets. Having said that, worksheets have got a bad rap because of what's on them.
Right.
Chad was talking about 50 questions, and it does not have to be that way. And again, to Steve's point, it's an opportunity to change. So if you don't have technology, worksheets are an easy solution. They come and pick up their collection of paper exercises, but don't just keep doing what you've always done. Try something different. Listen to everyone here. We're all saying the same message. So I don't know, Chad, can you share, please, the first example I sent you?
Yeah, I'll share the.
Now, this is a typical example of a worksheet. No, not that one, Chad.
Okay.
The first one.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me get that one here. Okay. Can you see that?
I'm still seeing the purple one.
Oh, okay.
The yellow one?
Yeah.
Better reshare your screen.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, this is a classic worksheet. It's from a publisher here in Australia. It's obviously not me, but let's ignore the fact that they've expressed basic facts as an algorithm. So it's suggesting that you have to do it algorithmically. You got one way. Down the right hand side of that chart is telling you the strategy to use. It's just a typical busy activity. Keep the kids active, somewhat active at least, for 5 or 10 minutes. Now, if you look at the other example there, Chad, and I sent this one because it piggybacks off the visual model I was showing you. 10 fours are 40. What's 5 fours? Okay, there's only 8 examples on that sheet. It has a visual representation. Ideally, it would ask them to explain what's happening, what's happening here. 10 threes are 35 threes must be half of that. I know that. So, you can still try to capture some of these practices, which we're all speaking about. And it doesn't have to be a huge amount of, answers, if you like. It can be a lot of thinking and building that conceptual understanding. Teachers, yes, they may not have technology, but I don't see any excuses apart from their own understanding as to why they can't try something different to capture what we are all spruiking here, these practices.
So I really like that purple sheet, but I would also think, thinking about purposeful questions and discourse, which is going to look very different when kids aren't all sitting together in a classroom. I would love to just add a question under each one of those models.
Yeah.
Explain your thinking. How did you know?
I was going to say that very thing.
Oh.
Dang it.
So,
You're exactly. No, you have right. You should say that. Or tell your parent how you know that. Or tell your sibling. Let's bring others into the learning process.
Yeah, I was about to do that question. Sorry, I interrupt. But since we've been talking about the importance of telling or trying to thinking out loud and try to communicate your thoughts, so how we can help teachers to do that. And I love that idea. Tell that to your parent, or even you are not there and you cannot be there to see what they are thinking. The idea of asking them to think and asking them to say that to their parents, it's really a good idea. I love that, Chad. And those kind of ideas are really helpful because they can use them really quick in their current activity. Love that.
So Alex, I think your question is right. I mean, I think that you have to resort to handing out papers of some sort or another. You've got to go deliver them and all, but again, it's substandard. The kids in the private schools of Guatemala and Ecuador have computers. And once again, the rich are getting richer and the poor are being screwed. And I think that this is an opportunity for us to recognize that there's not a bandwidth, there is not enough internet connectivity, and there are not enough computers. I think the most amazing headline that I've seen in the last 3 months was in the Washington Post. Millions of computers distributed, thousands lost. You know what? Where in the real world do you have a breakage or a loss rate of less than 0.1%? I mean, it's like, of course they're going to be lost and broken. I mean, that's what happens. I mean, you know, we buy them for ourselves, we break them, we fall, we lose them and all. So I just think that millions, we need to have tens of millions of them that distributed. What is a Chromebook now? You know, $125, $150? I mean, think about what an investment that is. And then we've got to find ways to argue to the policymakers that this is one of the enabling ways. I mean, how many years has, you know, for selfish or non-selfish reason, you know, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates been talking about the fact that kids that don't have access to the internet are at a severe, significant disadvantage. And what we see now is exactly that happening. So we use paper, but we also find ways to do it differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that a lot. It's really valuable. Yeah, Jere, were you going to say something? Yeah.
Just going to say, the connectivity problem is huge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, equipment's one thing. And if you can't get the connectivity to be consistent and not constantly dropping in and out,
Mm-hmm.
that is so hard on any kind of classroom interaction. So I
Yeah.
don't disagree with you, Steve, but boy, solving that one's tough in remote places.
Well, it is tough. And even for the haves, I was just on the phone with someone from Columbia who teaches at the wealthiest school in the country. And a lot of their students went to their country home because of COVID and aren't able to connect. I mean, it happens at all levels. And I mean, they have lots of resources. So we shouldn't bemoan their problem, but the connectivity is a problem. And I think that says to me that teachers need to think outside of the box and supplement the connectivity. I mean, it's about helping them build knowledge without me there, really.
Right, and there's also, I mean, there are places that people are trying to solve it by people going to a location that might have good connectivity. And so if you can figure out ways that they get what they need for that short period of time if they can get to a place where they have it, but you also facilitate them going back and having enough to work on in order to come back and connect. So it's kind of that hybrid in and out, can also contribute, at least in our cities, that's one thing that people are using to try and help with this problem, which is a really, really impossible problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a challenge.
Just look at how many times we've said teachers have to, teachers need to, teachers must. I want to go back to what Linda said, and that is that it is just an unreasonable burden to expect teachers to do it alone and individually. That we know that isolation, professional isolation, is the single greatest obstacle to professional growth and all. And this situation only makes that clearer. We've got to find ways to share. We've got to, you know, we could put two classes together without any problem. I mean, Zoom can handle 20 kids or 40 kids without any issue. And so if we have that technology and one teacher's comfortable with it, one teacher isn't, one is a new teacher, one is a experienced teacher. I mean, we can do things where they co-teach. We can do things where you sit in on other people's lessons in ways that takes the burden of doing it only by yourself off the table.
Imagine the implications of that when we go back to whatever normal happens to be. When you are accustomed to co-teaching and then they tell you you need to stay in your room and teach by yourself. I can see a lot of people, a lot of teachers saying, oh no, I'm used to doing it this way and it works better. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that there's a shift in thinking towards internet access, broadband access being more of a utility rather than a benefit or an expense. It is something we consider a necessary part of existing. And of course, this is going to vary by country, but if you put it in the category of electricity or plumbing, internet access becomes one of those things that is a basic need.
Yeah,
To some degree. And it may happen at a community level, like we were saying just a moment ago, but it changes the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you remember, Kim, how they started out with that idea and then the private companies busted up any locale that was treating it as a utility. They came in and got them to undercut that possibility.
Yeah.
And you can see the implications of that now.
There's some grant monies out there to make that happen. And I think that as teachers, as educators in leadership positions, we can ask for it. And as teachers, you can go to your local level and say, we need a steady, strong bandwidth in our community so that students can do this and teachers can do this.
I love that. Kim, you and I have been talking, online in various other forums, and then hearing what has come out of today. For me, I think this is an opportunity. It's, scary time, an overwhelming time, but it's also an opportunity to do something entirely different, to really flip the game, to do things like co-teach or have smaller groups or larger groups or do real problems or think about what your curriculum looks like and what are those key concepts. What has to happen? I think those 8 foundational things still need to happen. That doesn't mean I should start talking to my students differently. It means I need to provide them activities so they're building knowledge. I understand what they're thinking, and I use that to plan where we want them to go. And to me, lots of different ways to do it. I mean, you may have an entirely new way that we haven't thought about. Maybe it means going out to a field and doing some activity there. I just don't know. But those foundational skills are there. That's one thing. And secondly, be patient with yourself, because even when I got my PhD in education, it took me 2 years to figure out what the heck I was doing in the classroom, because you have to try new things, have them fail, and then try other things. Be patient with yourself and with your students, and build trust. Those are the things I'm thinking about. What other things? Is there any sort of wrap-up statements that anyone would like to make?
I'd just like to say that I hope our listeners understand that none of us are suggesting that you do these practices in isolation of each other. They're integrated. So, you develop activities or lessons, and you're cognizant of all those practices. Some lessons will make certain practices more evident than others, but they are all interconnected.
Thank you.
And I want to go back to that. Each of the practices is on a continuum. You're not doing it good. Try it. Try it a few times. You're doing it some, do it a little more. You're doing it well, do it even better. That's where you are, and you just take the pressure off to say that you cannot do all of them tomorrow well. It's just not possible. And you're already probably doing 1 or 2 of them pretty decently. Now build on that.
Yes, I love that. And those practices are available in English. You can get those at NCTM on their website, and they're available in Spanish as well. We have translated it, so that's an important thing to do. You guys are I am always so humbled when I talk to you all. I realize how much more I still need to learn in this field. And then I realize also I can make an impact by helping your words get out to everyone. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Excellent. Talk to you
Bye
later.
now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.